Welcome to Resisting Pretense. This is honest conversations about a life of faith in modern culture. And our hope is that at the end of the day, we'll sharpen your thinking and inspire faith-infused conversations. Did I get all that right?
Yeah, I'm impressed you did it without notes. I'm
No, I'm looking right at my notes.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good.
We have a topic today. I've been so excited. We've been bantering around the idea for this podcast for months. It was one of the first ones, I think, really that we really played around with. And for those of you watching on the crappy phone cam, our unofficial Diet Coke sponsor, thank you very much. Which means we bought them and are drinking them.
Guess we all have a habit, ours just happens to be Diet Coke.
So we've been chewing on this topic for literally months and desperately hoping that the situation in the world didn't change and then make this topic pointless to do. And so I finally get to ask the question, so who wants to marry?
Nobody wants to. He's
Never
already
mind.
married.
All right, so it is over 150 days
Since Russia?
since Russia invaded Ukraine.
Correct.
And so that is still in the news. And if you asked a Ukrainian, it's 14 years and 150 days. But it's been an ongoing part of our news cycle in this season of life. And I think a lot of people are fed up with Vladimir Putin. And so the title for today's podcast, Who Wants to Murder Putin? Which is very different than Who Wants to Marry.
Yeah. Well, Mrs. Putin at one point, if you asked her today, she may not agree with that. But
so, and it's a tongue-in-cheek question, but it really kind of goes back to the frustration over what many people consider the injustice of this incursion into Ukraine. And frankly, many people who I've heard compare today's Putin to World War II's Hitler, which is kind of funny because the Russians are calling the Ukrainians fascists, and that's partly why they're going there. So, but and you probably have an opinion whether that's a fair or not fair comparison, but it still prompts the question, like, what do you do about somebody that you consider, particularly if you consider them evil or aggressively unjust, and on the world stage like this? What do you do with that? When do you, as a person of faith, as a Christian following Jesus, go from the love your enemies, turn the other cheek, prayer is the answer, that side of our faith, to the aggressive opposition that you might see, like when Jesus confronts the Pharisees and frankly insults the Pharisees, when he turns over the tables in the temple to clear it out from being a marketplace? When you go from more passive, thoughtful disagreement to aggressive opposition?
So your question, in a lot of ways, has the underlying place of saying there is a time when you go from being passive and prayerful and that kind of thing, moving to a more, and I don't know if aggressive or active stance. I mean, because you could honestly look at Martin Luther King, who people would say was very passive and yet was very aggressive in his stance. Another one might be, even though he was not a Christian, but Mahatma Gandhi would be somebody who had a very passive, but still in a very aggressive, I'm against this. And I think, when we talk about even the question of who wants to murder Putin,
sounds funny.
It does now. Well, especially after you said who wants to marry. as a believer, we run into that whole situation of, I have these strong feelings. I have these strong
Hmm.
feelings of injustice and wrongness, and
Wanting to correct a wrong.
and in other words, in order for a wrong to be corrected, I have to blame somebody. I have to put that someplace,
Mm.
and so, you know, we look at it. I have friends who are very strong about saying, I hate Putin.
Mm.
Um, and they say that because their children have chosen to be in the fight on the Ukrainian side.
Right.
Um,
Yeah,
and
someone
yet,
in our church whose son is over there fighting on behalf
absolutely,
of Ukraine. Right.
absolutely. And from our standpoint, it's so real because this isn't something new. What Putin has done with Ukrainian isn't something new. It is because it happens all over the world all the time.
Right.
It's very personal to us because it's reflective of our conflicts in Europe to begin with.
Sure.
And
Sure.
so it draws it all back home to
It's like a
us.
national memory,
Right,
kind of. Yeah.
right. And so for us, it's like, oh, this is not good. You know, I could make the argument. Then on Putin's side, it's like, this was our land to begin with. We're just taking back what was originally ours to begin with. And so that's where that whole conflict begins to go, oh no, that's wrong.
I'll
That's
murder you now.
not. Put the knife down.
Yeah, and I think, the bottom line is, like, you and I, pastors in Podunk, Arizona, are not in a place to do anything about this. But we deal with similar issues, smaller scale, all of us, every day. Like, there's the jerk that is in your workplace that you don't like, that treats people terribly, or there's the bully at school or in the neighborhood that is doing hateful things to people and engendering that kind of hateful response. And so these are things that we deal with, just at a different scale. But then the question still exists: when do you move from that kind of gentle, a lot of people would use the word passive kind of response of turn the other cheek, or pray for them, to something more active and or aggressive? When how do you navigate that decision? um, we talked a little bit in our prep about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who I think is a super interesting study. He was a 19, I don't show my historical ignorance, World War II, 50s, 40s, 40s. Okay. Yeah, yeah. So he was a 1940s church leader in Germany. During World War II, he was considered a kind of a major figure in faith for the 1900s, the 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
Wrote some pretty amazing stuff, some really challenging stuff about discipleship. And he was in the position as a church leader in Germany of, did he engage in an active resistance to the Nazi regime, or did he kind of keep his head down and pray for God's will to be done and justice to be served? And that, and where was he going to land?
Well, and it was interesting because he was caught up. I mean, how it often happens to us is he walked into a situation, or was brought into the situation as just being a church leader,
Mm-hmm.
and looking at the United Church of Germany, although he was not part of the United Church, but watching how was the church reacting to what was happening in Germany. And as the German government began to control more and more of the church and demand that you hold the government higher than you hold the church, he would gain this uh, opinion of, no, that's not wrong. We are, God is higher than the government. God is higher
Yeah.
than.
Yeah.
And so as the government became more powerful and demanding of the church, the more
Mhm.
he started to push back. But it wasn't like this. He woke up one day and said, "Oh, I think it's time to murder Hitler." It was a thing that you actually watched as he walked through to go,
Mhm.
"Okay, I'm supporting the government. I'm supporting them. I'm supporting the government. Oh, wait a minute. They're beginning to become God instead of loving God and supporting God, and now I'm beginning to say, no, this is wrong."
Yeah, and I misremembered, or maybe I was remembering more Hollywood versions of his life and choices, but at what point I thought he actually got directly involved in a plot to assassinate
He did.
Hitler. Well, I don't know. I went back and re-looked at it. He did very intentionally join a resistance movement. But the only thing that I saw that he himself had said was that he was trying to form relationships that when this war was over, that he was preparing the way to kind of rebuild the church in Germany. And what he was doing was for the benefit of the church. But in the course of doing that, he was becoming a courier for intelligence back and forth between the Allies and resistance in Germany. And he wrote some stuff that expressed considerable amount of guilt, because he knew that what he was doing was connected to plans to assassinate Hitler, even if that's not what he was directly trying to do, or the goal of his own efforts. He knew it was part of a larger movement. And there was a struggle,
Mm-hmm.
I think, in him of like, should I be a part of this? Should I not be a part of this? Is this really right? That's tough stuff.
Well, and I think that was part of, and I guess that might have been where I got the impression, was because part of his biography was talking about that struggle of, if I have the opportunity,
Mm-hmm.
do I take that opportunity? Is this a sense of evil that I need to get rid of in order for the church or God to reign?
Right,
You know,
right.
and so I think there was this struggle in him of, given the opportunity, do I do it or do I not do it? Is that murder, or am I just ridding the world of evil?
That's gosh, I'm so glad I'm not in that chair.
Me too.
But we do, again, in our own way, we face that chair, and like, do I, if I got somebody in the workplace who's rude and overbearing and demeans other people and cuts them down, at what point do I move from, maybe just avoiding that person, or praying for their attitude to change, or supporting my coworkers, to like putting that person in their place? When does that moment happen? What do you think?
Well, honestly, my first thought was that it really based on personality,
Mm,
because some people would jump right to this is wrong, this is injustice, and go too far to the side of action.
that's a good point.
Other people would be more passive about it, and maybe never even get to the point of action. They would just say, "I quit,"
Hmm.
which never deals with really what is the problem in the workplace. So I think there's a point as believers that we have to go, what is our place?
What's my motivation? Like, am I just angry and wanting to hurt someone, or am I honestly wanting to resolve a broken situation?
Well, and is my motivation out of a sense of unfairness and emotion, versus out of a sense of, how do I react to the situation in love? How would I, that pithy statement of, what would Jesus do? You know,
Everything right.
um, would I be able to walk into that situation and be able to speak the truth in love, knowing that it was going to create controversy, knowing that that might come back on me, but knowing that's the right thing to do, which is kind of the balance of all that, but really, really hard to do.
Yeah, I think that's a definite place where we, rather than just react instinctually, we've got to react very thoughtfully, prayerfully, with a sense of God's leading in it. Like if you're naturally a fighter, like in the fight or flight kind of dichotomy, if you're naturally a fighter, then I think you got to pray really hard to say, God, is it time to put the gloves on, or maybe take the gloves off? But is it time to stand up and fight, or is it just that I'm angry and want you know want to vent my anger? Then that's probably not the right time to fight. The right time to fight is when you're doing it for all the right reasons, not just to satisfy your own frustration.
Well, and to flip that coin over then is also that person that says, I'm not a fighter, but now is it time for me to put on my adult pants and you knew where I was going with that,
Yep.
didn't you? But I mean, to really say, it's time for me to suck up my courage and step
Mhm.
into this situation and bring it out in the light, because sometimes fighters don't respect you if you don't fight back. They don't. It's like,
Right.
oh, I can run over you all the time until you step up and go, I'm done with you. And then they go, oh, wait a minute,
I
and
was only kidding.
yeah, which doesn't work either.
Yeah.
Um, but the point being is that sometimes we can be too passive. And especially if you are not an aggressive person, sometimes you've gotta suck up that courage and go, it's time for the truth to come out.
Now, I'm going to credit you because I think it was you that asked the question, but uh, does it have to be one or the other? Can you do both? Can you have the gentle in spirit kind of attitude of Jesus, where you love your enemy, you turn the other cheek, you pray for those who persecute you, do good to those who do harm to you? Can you have that kind of attitude, but also actively oppose evil? Can you do both?
Oh, just ask the tough question. I can do it to you when I don't have to answer. Now you're just
ask
turning
your
the
questions back
turning
to
it
me.
right back at me. I think the answer is yes, but I think the answer has got to be an understanding that evil is real. It is present. It is something that goes on in our world. And if we say it's not real, then we are not really understanding that there's a true enemy out there that's trying to destroy humanity and trying to destroy the
Hmm.
spiritual world and our faith in God. But we also have to understand that what evil does is manipulates humanity.
Hmm.
And our job is to love humanity but hate evil. And there's a place there where we have to say, can I show love and still fight evil in a particular person, in a particular way? So the answer to your question from my perspective is, yeah, you can do both, but it is very difficult.
Yeah, and I was thinking back. You mentioned earlier Martin Luther King. Clearly, there was an example of actively opposing what he considered wrongs in society, and not he, but what I think all of us now consider, or most of us now consider, wrongs in society. Actively opposing it, but doing it in such a way that he wasn't he wasn't just returning, you know, punch for punch, or, jab for jab. He was doing it in a way that um, highlighted his opposition without just escalating the the evil. Wasn't just, you know I'm having a hard time putting words to it, but wasn't just trading blows. It was fighting in a different kind of a different set of rules. And I guess on a global scale, as I think back to the original question of Putin, his name's fun to just Putin. Um, I guess in a sense, that's what things like sanctions are. It's a way to express that, like, we're opposed to this, we don't like it, and we're gonna do what we can to make your life harder without actually punching you in the face. Um, and because punching them in the face would escalate things on a global scale that I don't think anybody wants to see the U.S. and Russia in a active, no holds barred kind of war, because literally the fallout would be horrendous. Um, you see what I did there? It's pretty good. Uh,
I I need one of those like rim shot things, you know. There might be one of those buttons. I'm not sure.
but yeah, I think that's the challenge. Is like when we can find a way to do both. I think it's a remarkable valuing of the compassion of Christ, but also the justice of Christ. And like when we can actively oppose wrong, but in a way that still is with as much compassion and prayer and thoughtfulness as possible. I think that's the ultimate win. It's not easy. It's not easy to find.
No, and I think it depends on the injustice
Mm,
that's been created. Um, I so when you think about somebody who walks into an elementary school and shoots it up,
hmm,
that is such an emotionally tugging situation. There's no way you can justify that. There's no way you can
right.
say, you know, I mean, it would be very easy for me to say, why are you even putting that guy on trial? You know,
Mm,
um, if he even makes it out alive.
right.
You know, in most of those situations, you know, the offender doesn't even live.
Seems like it. Yeah.
But you know, I look at that as such a deep level of evilness. Um, but then I also have to look at that and go, but where did that evil come from? Where did that person didn't just wake up one day and decide, oh, I think I'll go buy a gun and go shoot up a school. That goes way back into maybe not even just their generation, but the generation before. And those spiritual chains that are connected.
What's the
What
brokenness
is the
that led
broken?
there? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And um, so there's a part of me that wants to be compassionate to go, you were not created that way. God did not create you to put you in this situation to do this. So what happened? What took place? That's the part of me that wants to love. The other part of me goes, but what you did was completely wrong, and we cannot justify it. We cannot, you know, no matter what happened to you before, this is not okay. This is not.
Yeah. And I think that that's a great example, even though it's an extreme example. It's a great example, though. That I think extremes always test our our values, like test out. And so when you bring that example up, on the one hand, I agree. There's something broken that led to that situation. I do have compassion for that, but I also, like, I don't have any hesitation about, like, if law enforcement goes in, or a teacher defends themselves or a student defends themselves and they end up killing the perpetrator of something like that. Like, I'm like, that's what happened. I mean, like, you
But that's
created
natural
created a
consequences.
life and death situation,
Hmm.
and probably you're going to die.
Well, and that was the other part we kind of talked about is that when I think about somebody that is hurting my brothers and sisters, I want to step in and help protect them.
Right.
It's kind of the idea that this young man decided to go to the Ukraine because he felt like what was happening to the Ukrainians was completely out of line.
Hmm.
And so he said, I need to do something. And so he said, I'm signing up for the Foreign Legion or whatever the organization was that
Right.
he joined to say, no, I'm standing up for these people because it's the right thing to do. Sometimes I think our actions of love is not necessarily do I look at the person that is committing it as much as Do I look at the harm that's being done because of what they're doing?
Yeah, there's something fundamentally important, I think, in the difference between, like, I want to go protect Ukrainians rather than I just want to go kill Russians. Like, there's a significant difference in mentality,
Correct.
and probably in what the people with those mentalities do in the course of their service. Like, I one is justice oriented and one is retribution oriented, and I think retribution always leads to further injustice.
Mm-hmm.
Where,
And it's interesting because we oftentimes think of peacemakers as those who are passive.
hmm,
And sometimes you have to go through conflict to get to peace. In other words, somebody who just says, to put it into more of a real life situation, if I have a bully or whatever going on at work, if I do nothing and I just quit, that bully survives and continues to do what they do. But if I look at it and go, even if I look at it and say, they're not bullying me, but they're bullying them, if I step into it, it's because I love them and don't want him to do that, to continue, him or her to continue to do that, but to change their ways.
right.
And so I may have to step into that conflict and may even create more conflict to get to peace. Does that make?
Yeah, but the goal is peace.
The goal is peace.
The goal is peace. The goal is reconciliation.
And the goal is not to harm them anymore, but to push them into repentance, to push them into turning away from what they're doing,
right.
and coming back to a place of. And I think that's oftentimes what Jesus did. I mean, I think that when we look at his turning over the tables, he didn't do it just because he was mad. He was doing it to say, this is wrong. And to say to the church, this is a house of prayer. This is not a house of giving the screws to our people.
Yeah.
This is a place that we are supposed to be lifting up God, and we're not doing that.
Yeah.
And so he stepped into aggressiveness, I believe, in hopes of repentance, not in hopes of just making a bunch of people mad.
Yeah, he did it for the person who had come to the temple because their life was falling apart, and they were coming to the temple to cry out to God. And as they walk into the temple courts, there's people like buying and selling and the back and forth, and they came in to try to engage with God and found themselves in a marketplace. And that's what incensed Jesus. It's like, this place has a purpose, and it's for those who need an encounter with God, and you're preventing that from happening. So,
well, and some historians, whether and I can't say it's true or not true because obviously I didn't live in that time. I know I'm old, but
yeah.
But some historians believe that a person who didn't have a lot of money might bring the one lamb that they have, and so you had to present the lamb to the priest, and the priest would go, "Oh, that lamb has a blemish. You need to go buy one from us." And so there was this
racket,
yeah, going on, and
entirely not. I would love to say that religious leaders don't have that capacity, but yeah, the news tells me otherwise.
Well, but that was probably one of the things that Jesus oftentimes picked on was what the Pharisees were doing.
Right.
What the teachers, the leaders of the church were doing. And here was a good example of him coming in and going, I'm not going to ignore this. I'm going to show that this is going on, and I'm going to protect the ones who are coming, but I'm also want to drive the ones who are doing this to repentance. Well, we know that didn't happen on the repentance side, but I'm sure all the followers of Jesus saw this guy that was saying, finally, somebody who's standing up for justice.
Right. And that's the full circle, I think. When we started with the question, who wants to murder Putin? I don't want to murder Putin. I would love for him to stop. I would love to. I'm glad that we are standing up in whatever ways we can for the Ukrainian people. I am hopeful that this will come to an end, although it's heartbreaking, the things that we see in the development of what's going on over there. But I don't want to murder Putin. I want him to stop, and I want people in danger to be protected. I want people to be able to go back to their lives and mourn their losses and move on. And I think that's the real answer, is like, if it's all about just ending a person, then it's just a cycle of violence that will continue on and on and on. And we see that whether it's in a global scale or whether it's at school or work or whatever, that cycle of violence has to end, and you end that by having a more redemptive purpose.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. That's all I got to say about that.
That's all I got to say. All right, Forrest Gump.
All right.
But I think that's the important part of what we're talking about is really being able to, one, pray about it, two, to check our motives, because is my motive really redemptive and repentance filled, or is it just retributional?
Yeah.
And number three, is my action going to accomplish what I'm desiring it to do? Because sometimes we'll do something thinking it's the right thing, and having not thought through it just creates more aggression, versus, I see where you're going with this. And I can think of situations in my life where I have thought what I was going to do, the way I was presenting the truth I thought was the right way, when it really came out very harsh and more aggressive and created more aggression than really solving the problem. And so there were places in my life where I could go back and go, yeah, I should have thought that one through a little better.
Yeah. Well, there you have it. We're pastors. We gave you a 3-step plan. That's what we do.
It's what we do.
It's only time in a sermon for a 3-step plan. All right. Well, that's the conversation for today, and I'm excited about just seeing where we get to go with this podcast. We hope that this will give you some talking points in conversations where your faith intersects with real life all around us. So
it's a good day.
Until next time.